Welcome back to Klein in Class through the Lemoyne Center. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite conversational types, the root game. Alright, so a little bit of background. As you know, I have been an English teacher, and so one of the things I try to do is I try to teach kids not just, to read or how to take out themes, which is lots of fun for me personally, but also how to figure out what's going on around them. This is where the root game comes in. Alright. So, you've probably heard this a million times, but I think you'll hear it at least a million more before you graduate from high school. You don't have to know everything. You just have to have a skill set in front of you that can get you through it. This is where the root game comes in. Here's how it works. The English language is made up of some very basic roots. And then we start slamming them together. So we'll have, I put up here as an example, witchcraft. Alright? It's two different words, we took them, we threw them together. Now compound words are pretty simple because you just, you have two different ones and then you stick them together, like roundhouse or turtle dove. You just take a couple words, put them together. In German it's actually very, very common. They'll take, the word for tank is basically the words for car, armor, and cannon just all schmacked together. It's really a lot of fun because then you only have to memorize certain words. I also understand that English can be a difficult language to master because it can get a little confusing at times. So I'm going to try and walk you through the root game, the right way of doing it, or the wrong way of doing it, and then we're going to start applying it ourselves. Now, what is the root game? The root game is where you take a word that you're not familiar with or you're trying to figure out the context for, and you're gonna break it apart to see what's going on. Now, if you've done this before or this kind of work before, you know that one of the big hints to what a word means is the surrounding context. I'll give you an example from my own life. A little while ago, I was reading through some material on predestination. So basically, how this works is, let's say, someone tells you, tomorrow you're going to be at school. Will it happen? Now, as you know full well, because you're old enough, that sometimes we make plans and those plans don't go through. Now, do those plans not go through because things just happen and there's no way of knowing for certain what will happen tomorrow? That's okay. That's to say that there's a randomness to the universe. You never know what's going to happen. On the other hand, there's also the concept of predestination. Why didn't things happen like that? Well, there was a rainstorm. Why did the rainstorm happen? Because it was always going to happen. Now, the issue with predestination is that it can also be rephrased as the term fatalism. And I'd never heard that before. I mean, maybe at some point in time someone may have brought it up, but it didn't register. So I had to use the surrounding context to see what they were talking about. Okay, so they're talking about how, realistically, things are just going to happen the way they're going to happen and there's no other possible way that they go. We call that predestination. No, I'm going to rephrase it as fatalism because that sounds more depressing, I suppose. So, even though I was unfamiliar with what it meant, or rather, I was unfamiliar with the surrounding paperwork from it, I could figure it out based on the context. Another way of doing this is to play the root game. Alright, so predestination. Alright? What can we break off this word to make it smaller and easier to understand? Pre. Now, technically speaking, we call this a prefix. We also have suffixes, and then we have strong and weak verbs. So, at this point, let's just focus on how we can break off a little bit and figure out pre. What's that mean? So, prenatal care, presuppose, preempt, just means before. Then we'll have, I'll say nation here. Strictly speaking, the actual suffix here is going to be the shun. Alright? That's it's easier understood than it is spoken of, but it's the stuff of. So it's before whatever this is, the stuff of. We know what this is about then. Whatever's in the middle here is before the stuff of this material here. Now, the reason I pull out nation here is because we know what a nation is. Now, a nation is a subset. It's a group. Right? It's an idea is what it is. So we're just going to say it's the stuff of an idea. And then right here we have destiny. So it's before your destiny, the stuff of that idea. So altogether this almost makes a sentence. Before your destiny, this is the stuff of that idea. And that's what predestination really means. Before your destiny is accomplished, the stuff of it already exists. So you could say, it is predestined, the sun rise in the east and set in the west. It's the stuff of things that happen beforehand. Now, said all that to say this. I'm going to walk you through some of the times that you can use this root game very successfully, and I'm also going to caution you about how you can use the root game not well. And so that's going to take a little bit more creative thinking. So walk with me through on this. Okay, so I started with witchcraft. Okay, so as you'll recall from last week's lesson about the root of that word witch, witch didn't always mean a woman. Witch actually used to be any human being with magical stuff. So the base there to witch would be magic, and you could put in parentheses human there, that's fine. And then craft, if you say I'm going to apply my craft, I'm going to do crafts today, it's work, it's stuff you do. So it's work stuff, magic people. Magic people, work stuff. Slam it together. What's it mean? It means the work stuff of magic people. And that's what witchcraft is. It's people doing stuff. Now, that's how you play it really well. It's almost directly there. You need a little bit of understanding of the background behind the word in order to get it, and we're going to go into that later. But you're also going to take little moments here and there to say, well, especially if there's context around it to help you figure out what it means. Figuring out how they're using witchcraft there can be helped by knowing the root of the word. Next, teacher. All right, you know what a teacher is, obviously. But you just slap these bad boys apart. You say the person of, and then teach. Now watch this. What if I tell you a law is Antiteacher? Now maybe you can put this together simply by reading through the surrounding context. It says, well, the law is Antiteacher because it cuts out bonuses and it cuts out money to the school system and it makes it harder to, get into the school system, Okay. But simply by splitting that apart to say it's Antiteacher, not only do you get a better understanding of the issue with this law, but it also tells you specifically the issues that this law is talking about. So a second ago I said, one of the things is that it reduces the amount of money going into the school system. You could say it's anti-school, but they focus on the teacher themselves. So if you have a teacher, you can go to them and you can say, well, how does it affect you? Or maybe you even think about it and go, maybe the teacher themselves won't be affected so badly. So what the surrounding context is lying to me. Simply by breaking it apart and looking at the smaller portions of it, it gives you a bit of a better understanding as to all the surrounding material. All right? That's how you play the root game. You add stuff on, you break stuff off. All right? And once more, I'll repeat what I said a while ago about the English language, which is hard and fast rules don't always apply, which is what you'll see here, because you can take something like witchcraft, and you say, well, that's the work of magic stuff. And someone will say, well, it's his economic theory is witchcraft. And you're like, well, huh? And there's surrounding context to it. But it does help to try and break things apart in order to understand the general principles of what the person is talking to you about. Next, rooting. I just wrote this down because it's so easy to go through. Root, ed. All right? Know what it means. It means to have taken root. Good stuff. here is where you can make a mistake. Okay. Put down racism. Now, if you were unfamiliar with the background on this, you could make a terrible decision here. You would simply split this in half and you would say ism. Well, I know what an ism is. That's the concept behind. A race is a competition between two different peoples. You are running side by side. A bicycle race, a foot race, a race between a tortoise and a hare. You could put an entirely innocuous, that just means harmless, concept here and saying, oh, this must be about studying how people are in foot races. No. No. Because what you're making the mistake here is, unlike witch, a word that we usually only use in pejorative senses, at least most of the time, historically, you say, well, it's just about magic. The word race has a lot of different ways that people interpret that and view it, and have viewed it, and have talked about it. So sometimes when you try to split these words apart, if you don't stop for a second and go, okay, well, what are some other definitions here? Alright, this is one of the times that you really have to look at the surrounding context. Alright? Because this is almost solely used as a pejorative. Alright? So make sure when you're, especially, I'll put it to you like this. One of the best ways to know that something is bad, or at least viewed negatively, is this ism here. You know, people rarely put isms on the end of something. It just means the idea of. Okay? So you could say capitalism. Alright? People usually don't have to talk about capitalism as an ism, the idea of, when they're talking about it in a positive sense, because it's just something that happens. You go to McDonald's, you buy a hamburger, cheeseburger, drink, you sit down, you eat, you drink. That's technically capitalism. But you don't go to your mother today and go, Mother, I'm going to go out and have capitalism today. You say, I'm going out for lunch. Capitalism is just something that happens as a result. So, be careful when it comes to ideas, and also, you know, take a second to look behind the different ways that word can be used. So, that's why I say the root game is beneficial in that it can help you figure out what a word you're unfamiliar with means. It can also be helpful in figuring out how people view the word itself. Like for this one, the one we just talked about. You know, the study of races, foot races, or motorcycle races, is more of a sports thing. So you don't really need to apply this in terms of a sport. So if someone said, oh, I'm a sports statistician. Sometimes you'll be listening to the football game on the radio or a hockey game, and they'll say, oh, the last time that they've been up 3-0 was back in 1967. You know why? Because someone, I don't know who wanted this job, but there are people who keep track of all this stuff. And they'll go in and they'll say, oh, the last time we had 5 shots on goal, that hasn't been since so-and-so. Alright? Or sometimes what they'll do is they'll say, omitting this criteria, the last time we had 5 shots on goal. It's like, okay, you know, well, there are people who keep track of these statistics. So take a second, break it apart, figure out how you can use each of those. Now, prefixes, suffixes, like isms, anti, it's really difficult to change the meaning of anti because it's so beneficial to us. Anti-aircraft gun, anti-government, anti-hate. Who realistically out there declares themselves anti-love? Nobody! Because, and here's the beautiful thing about these prefixes, is that simply by including them, they do everything we need them to. These core words here, race, teach, they're vague enough that we can bend them a little bit more. So, whenever we start breaking this stuff off, we'll start with the prefixes and the suffixes and whittle it down all the way until you get to the very core word there that we'll put all together. And just like I did over here with predestination, we'll read it all out and we'll try and figure it out together. Alright, so let's keep going. Government. Alright? Now, once more, you can play that same root game here. Now, you know what a ment is, like an establishment, right? Government. Not just an establishment, but foment, right? Govern. To govern means that you are a politician and you are running a political establishment. You're running a political enterprise. So a governor, a president, even senators who are members of the government actually do dictate the terms of Congress and things of that nature. So they'll still govern in amongst themselves. Here's something that some of my friends love bringing up. Self-government. Myself, yourself, himself, herself. Me, governing my own set. Basically, people should govern themselves. Now, I'm going to once more walk away from a strict pejorative here, and we're going to start talking about how broadly we can interpret self-government. Now, to govern, as I've said, whether you're talking about the local level, a mayor, all the way up into a national level like a president, govern is a very broad concept. Dictation, you can say it's about making and passing rules. You can say it's about coming up with ideas for how people should act. Okay? Self can also, as I mentioned with myself or herself, that can, or selfish, that can also be a root there. So self can be very vague as well. So to say to self-govern can be very open to interpretation. So always, like I said, check the surrounding context for what they're talking about. But yeah, definitely, you can have an understanding of what someone means by self-government, not because you've read it out of a dictionary, but just because you understand the individual concept that's went into this. Alright, we're running out of time here, so before I give you your challenge, we're going to do one of my favorite words, anti-disestablishmentarianism. Now, we already talked about isms. The thought of, you can also say practice. Ian, people will bounce this one around off of me. I usually say it doesn't matter too much that you know what an Ian is. It's just a subset of something else. Okay. And you pop it right here. Ment. M-E-N-T. Alright? We talked about here, down here with self-government. So this is a system. Alright? Then we'll start popping off prefixes. Anti. We've already talked about this. Against. Anti-aircraft. Anti-hate. Dis. You know what a diss is when somebody disses you. It's a negative. Now, this is where things are going to get a little bit more... I'm going to pop a couple things off here. I'm not going to tell you why, but then I'm going to tell you why after I get to the root. The root here, in fact, is not establish. It is, in fact, stable. Think about that for a second. You know what a stable is? If I said that's stable. I mean, even if you say, well, a stable can be where we put horses. Why do we call it a stable? Well, because it's stable. The reason you have to put a horse or a cow or a pig into a stable is so they don't move around. So realistically, stable just means to prevent a lot of motion or chaos. So this is to be stable-ish. You know what it means to be ish. About. About or approximately. So it's about stable. It's about being stable. The S here, I don't really want to have to deal with, but we've already talked about it. It's against negative establishment. So a stable system. So altogether you would say establishment means it's a stable system. Then there's the anti, this is disestablishment. Then it's against negative people who are about stabilizing a system, the thought of. Now, that's a lot to say, all to put it this way. To be anti-disestablishmentarianism is the idea that you shouldn't be disestablishing a government. So to say that if someone stands up and says, we should abolish the government, just get rid of the whole thing, you know, you'll hear people sometimes talk about that. People like this would be against that. And they'll give you their reasons. And the core of it is right here. Stability. Stability. So whenever you're dissecting someone's ideas or words, you don't have to tell them what they think or what you think of what they think. But sometimes it's good to cut away all the fat. You're against a negative thing. Alright, fine. But that negative thing is also against something else. But go to the root. They're looking for stability. If they're not gaining stability based on their stance and their function, then are they really living up to the word itself? Not necessarily. So sometimes this can help you not just to understand how other people think, but also to review whether or not the other people who are teaching or thinking this way, in fact, act in accordance with their own philosophy. And it goes all the way down here to self-government, right? To govern yourself means that you yourself, myself, I have to govern myself. If I act like a maniac, or if I'm popping off at the mouth, or if I'm not doing well in my studies, then I'm not self-governing. So if I say, well, I want self-government here, I don't want to be in a class. Well, if you can't govern yourself, you're not governing yourself. And because you're not governing yourself, you cannot. So, that's how we play the root game. Alright, challenge today. What is a word? It doesn't have to be massive. It can be simple. Like neighborhood. Write it down, post it, and right after you write down the word, try and break it apart into chunks. You know, how do you, what is your definition of that word there? Like for, don't use neighborhood, but like you have neighbor, okay, so that's someone who lives next to you, and the hood is kind of like an area around it, or like a hood, you know, you think about it going over your head, but realistically a hood is just a way of talking about the general principle of. Alright, and then you say, okay, so that's the general principle of people who live together. That's what neighborhood is. Alright, so go ahead and comment, do your thing, have a lot of fun, and keep learning. Thanks.